In the spirit of what we started, new tradition, we try to tell a joke before we get going that's kind of relevant. So here's today's joke regarding this topic. Okay, so there was once a talking sheepdog. He ran up and told the farmer, well, all the sheep are in the pen. The farmer says, well, he says all 70 sheep are in the pen. The farmer says, well, I only counted 67. The sheepdog says back to him, well, I rounded up. Okay, there's our joke for today. Okay, so today's speaker will be talking about numeracy. Dr. Ellen Peters is a professor in both the psychology and journalism departments down at the University of Oregon, in the School of Journalism and Communication. And she also serves as the director for the Center for Science Communication Research. She is an academic expert in decision making and the science of science communication. And that was my initial foray. I had kind of reached out. I was looking online for speakers on science communication, and then I saw that she had background in psychology, and she also had spoken and taught courses on numeracy, and I figured, okay, we'll get that one. We'll get her. So her primary research interests concern how people judge and decide, and how evidence-based communication can boost comprehension and improve decision making. She earned her bachelor's in economics from the Wharton Business School with a minor in chemical engineering. So, interesting. And she has her master's and PhD in psychology, judgment, and decision making from the University of Oregon, where she now teaches. So, Dr. Peters.
Good morning. Thank you guys for coming. And John, thank you for finding me and inviting me. I've been looking forward to this. I'm going to do a little bit different of a talk today than what I usually do. I'm a very traditional academic, as many of you out in the audience have been. And I usually talk in experiments. And I'm not going to do that today exactly. I'm going to talk instead more about what those experiments mean for you, and what they mean for your ability to use numbers and some simple habits that you can develop in life in order to use numbers better. I will be really curious what you think of the talk, because again, I haven't given this particular version of it before. Feel free to ask me questions. I might or might not be able to see your hands raised.
We'll take questions.
Oh, there's a set way. Okay, thank you. Sorry, don't mean to interrupt.
Questions at the end.
Yeah, questions at the end. So I study how numbers shape decisions. But more importantly, what I actually do, because I'm a psychologist, is I study how numbers shape how decisions feel. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about today. I want to explore a simple but powerful idea that you do not need to become a mathematician to make good numbers with decisions. By the end of the talk, I hope you understand that idea, and that you understand how numbers acquire emotional meaning, and how you can understand and work with those feelings in order to make better decisions. By understanding how numbers affect you, you can actually use them without being used by them. But let's start with something simple as soon as I remember how to do this. We're going to talk about why numbers matter in the first place. And they matter because numbers quietly govern modern lives today. They shape our medical decisions, our finances, our opportunities, even how we evaluate ourselves. And so a blood test tells us, are we healthy or not? A credit score influences what mortgage rate you actually get offered. A sleep score tells us how well we're rested, sometimes before we even notice how we feel, and sometimes it even changes how we feel. And these numbers don't just inform decisions. They influence our emotions, our confidence, and our trust. The stakes vary, but what we're going to talk about today is the idea that the psychology remains remarkably consistent across situations. And I'm kind of curious, and I'd like just to think for a moment. I don't need any responses yet, but I want you to think for a moment. Can you think of a number you encountered this week that influenced how you felt in a decision that you were trying to make. And even if nothing, it looks like it comes to mind for some of you, but even if nothing comes to mind right away, I can kind of promise you that numbers were probably there in the background somewhere, quietly shaping your day in a variety of ways. Most of us think about numbers as objective and as emotionally neutral. They're just kind of facts that are sitting there in the background waiting for us to use them or not use them. But numbers are often not quiet. They capture attention, they signal authority, and they often shape our attention before we've had a chance to think about them even. They don't always feel neutral, they carry emotional meaning. And today we're going to talk about how this emotion is not a distraction from numerical reasoning. It's actually one of the mechanisms through which numbers acquire meaning in decisions. And that emotional meaning is part of what shapes attention and interpretation and ultimately your decisions and your actions. These emotional reactions are not mistakes. They are not signs of mathematical weakness. They're simply part of how the human mind works. Long before we had formal mathematics, humans evolved these very intuitive ways of sensing quantity and sensing difference between quantities. And those intuitions combine with experience and comparison and context to give numbers emotional meaning that we then use in decisions. So that a risk statistic can feel small or it can feel frightening. A market drop can feel catastrophic, I don't know if y'all have been around lately, or trivial, depending upon what it is that you expected. In everyday life, numbers matter, and they acquire meaning through feeling. And again, it's often before deliberate reasoning begins. But understanding that numbers matter isn't the same as knowing how to work with them. Numbers don't just inform decisions, they actually create experiences of decisions. And we're going to look today at multiple experiences of decisions depending on what perspective you take on the number. But let me tell you first about a decision where numbers mattered quite deeply to me. In the early 2000s, I went from being a busy researcher and a parent of a preteen to someone who could barely walk in the morning. You can notice I can walk now. But I have rheumatoid arthritis. I've had it for years and years and years. And at that time, my medication had actually stopped working. Each day began with stiffness and pain, for those of you who might know what arthritis feels like. And for me, because it was rheumatoid arthritis, a growing fear that my world was starting to shrink, and a real fear that it was just going to continue shrinking. When I talked to my doctor, he presented me with a choice. I could stay on my current medication. It was safe, it was familiar, but it was increasingly ineffective. Or I could switch to something stronger, a stronger drug that might help, but it came with a warning, an increased risk of cancer. Now, I've spent my career, and I'm not new, I've spent my career studying how people make decisions with numbers, and especially medical risks. That's been a lot of my research. I understand framing, probabilities, and risk communication. And still, when I heard the word cancer, I felt that same jolt of anxiety that everybody feels. I was being asked to make a choice, and I'm getting too far away, and I was acting emotionally, reacting emotionally. I didn't consider that reaction irrational. It wasn't irrational. Risk feels different when it involves your own body. It's about you. And it turns out that studying decisions doesn't make you immune to being human. But something bothered me. The doctor's warning was vague. There might be cancer. There were some other things too, but I'm not going into all the detail. And he didn't offer me any numeric information at all. And so I did what I've spent my career encouraging other people to do. I asked for the numbers. And when I asked for the numbers, here's what I learned. The new drug offered about a 45% chance of remission. Staying on my current medication offered about a 15% chance. And that increased risk of cancer, it was about 0.1%. Now those numbers didn't eliminate risk, but they did change how the decision felt. That 45% felt hopeful to me. The 15% felt stagnant. 0.1%, that's not zero. There's still a chance. But I figured out that it meant that 999 of 1,000 people like me will not develop cancer. One person will, but 999 would not. For the first time, the choice didn't feel like the blind gamble that it originally felt like. It felt like a trade-off that I could see. Notice your reactions, though, as you hear those numbers. What felt big? What felt small? For me, the numbers radically changed how the decision felt. I did end up taking the medication. I think my doctor actually was kind of against it. I did end up taking the medication. I was lucky, and the medication worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody. And within weeks, I could walk easily again. It was amazing. What struck me in this, most in this decision was sort of a funny thing. It was the idea that before I had the numbers, fear first expanded into the space. It was just about a risk of cancer. Before I had the numbers, the decision felt like a binary choice between safety and danger. After I had the numbers, though, it became a trade-off, and a trade-off that I could evaluate, I could work with. Numbers didn't remove the uncertainty, didn't remove the risk, but what it did is it revealed trade-offs to me. I didn't make the decision because I was fearless. I certainly didn't make the decision because I was a mathematician. I made it because I noticed that the numbers were missing, and then I noticed how the numbers felt. One of the most important moments in that decision came when I began also asking myself a somewhat different question, not whether the information was correct, not whether I trusted the numbers, but whether my confidence in my interpretation of the situation matched how well I actually understood what I was being shown. In some moments, I noticed confidence rising simply because the statistics seemed precise and reassuring. In other moments, uncertainty appeared, not because the numbers were unclear, but because I lacked context for how should I be interpreting this. That recognition created space for me in my decision. Instead of reacting automatically to persuasive statistics or withdrawing from confusing ones, I began pausing to examine the relationship between my feelings of confidence and my depth of understanding the situation. Sometimes those were in sync, sometimes they weren't. And when they weren't in sync, that mismatch became a signal for me, not a failure. It was a signal for me that invited me to explore a little further, to compare numbers back and forth, and to talk further with my doctor as well. These habits are not special, they're learnable, and they change how decisions feel. In the end, I trusted myself, and I felt steady and confident in my decision. That decision mattered very deeply to me. But again, the skills behind it are not special, and they're also not limited to medical decisions. They apply whenever we encounter numbers that carry weight. Credit scores, investment returns, performance metrics, health trackers even. Numbers are the language of modern authority. We're surrounded by them. And the goal today is not to help you love math. I don't think I can do that. It's not to help you perform complex calculations. It's to help you understand how numbers affect you so you can use them deliberately rather than react to them automatically. In other words, the goal is simple. It's to use numbers without being used by them. In most decisions, you don't need much math. You need very little math, a little arithmetic sometimes. But you may want more confidence about when to trust numbers and when to question them. Today, what you're going to learn, hopefully, are habits rather than formulas. So let me ask you something. Think about a number you encountered recently that influenced how you felt about a decision. I sort of geared you up a little bit before. It could be medical, financial, or even just something completely everyday, like a medical test result, a weather forecast. You don't need to share it out loud, just notice it. Now ask yourself, how did that number make you feel? Did it make you feel more confident or more uncertain? Would anyone like to share a number that came to mind and how they felt about it? Yeah.
We were talking about our starting wages.
We in this row were talking about our starting wages out of high school and just comparing, and it was nostalgic, but it also showed some disparity
Yeah.
and our education and who we were as people at that time in the variances.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of numbers that influence decisions. Income and income comparisons bring up big feelings for people. If nothing came to mind for you, again, there are often numbers sitting there in the background, and they're influencing you quietly. So, to use numbers without being used by them, we need to understand our instincts with numbers, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Because it turns out that, again, before we calculate anything, numbers create an intuition. That intuition comes first, usually. You can feel the difference, or I would bet that you could feel the difference between how big that 45% felt compared to that 15%. That was a huge difference, wasn't it? I can't tell you when I saw that how big that felt. We didn't calculate anything. We just felt it. You can also feel the difference between that having no information about the chances of cancer versus that 0.1% chance versus having 1 out of 1,000 chances of cancer versus 999 chances to not have cancer out of 1,000. There's a difference in how each of those feels, even though the reality is the same across all of them. They're just transformations of the exact same number. The number instinct that we're going to talk about today actually has two separable parts. There's an intuitive sense of magnitude, and then there's emotional meaning. And we're going to talk about them one at a time. But to be honest, in the end, they often sort of happen at practically the same moment. But we're going to separate them first, just to think about these two different concepts. So humans and other species are built with what's just a very simple perception of magnitude, of quantity, of bigness. Having this intuitive sense of magnitude is critical for survival in species, and it was critical for our survival way back in the day. A lion, when confronted with other lions, has to quickly figure out that there's about 3 of them, and then decide what that quantity means about whether he should flee or he should fight. He's not counting like we count, and yet nonetheless he quickly knows about how many there are. Other species do the same thing, and it's fast and it's adaptive. A monkey quickly judges the number of mangoes in a tree, but also how many other monkeys are there to compete with him. Honeybees need to know which area has the most flowers for foraging, but that means that the bees also have to be able to figure out the magnitude. They're not counting, they're sensing. It's an intuition. But fortunately, they all have a magnitude instinct to help them in this way. And it turns out that we do too. So we're going to do a really quick exercise. I'm going to show you 2 sets of quantities. And I'd just like to know, just yell out which set has more, A or B. And do it as quickly as you think. You don't have to, please don't count, just sense it. Yeah, do you see how quickly you did that? You didn't count. There's 6 of them in one and 8 of them in the other. But we sense quantity amazingly quickly. The average adult, in fact, can reliably distinguish between 2 sets of quantities if they differ by a ratio of about 7 to 8 or less. This is an easier one because it was 6 to 8, because I wanted to make sure you could do it very quickly. This precision does vary a little bit by individual. Some people are more precise, some people are less precise. And then, unlike most other species can sense only quantities like this, like we've got 8 things there and 6 things on the other side. But with us, we do the same thing when we're confronted with formal numbers. We feel how big one formal number is compared to another. That it's magnitude instinct that allowed us to feel the difference between how big the 45% was and how big the 15% was. We didn't count. We calculated nothing. We just knew. You just had a sense of it. But magnitude alone is not meaning. Numbers gain meaning when they also connect to emotion and comparison and context. That combination of magnitude, like we were talking about a moment ago, and emotion is what I call number instinct. It's that combination of the 2 things. It's fast, it's powerful, and it often drives decisions before analysis begins. And the easiest way to experience number instinct is through some fairly simple exercises that we're going to go through right now. And let's start with this one. I'm going to show you two statements, one at a time. I don't want you to analyze them. I just want you to go with your immediate reaction. 90% survival rate after surgery, 10% mortality rate after surgery. Which one feels safer, though? Survival. And yet they're the same reality. So raise your hand if the first statement actually felt safer to you. Raise your hand if the second statement felt safer. Raise your hand if neither of them, there is no difference for you. Yeah. Kind of depends on whether you quickly did the math or not. People most often think that 10% mortality feels much worse. That's true across most people. But again, the twist is they do describe the exact same reality. They're the same number, they're just a transformation of one another. That 90% survival is equal to 10% mortality. But this is number instinct at work. It shows that feelings about numbers emerge before analytical reasoning, before you do that calculation to see that they're the same thing. And here's the key point. That initial reaction was not a mistake. It was information. The two statements did describe the exact same reality, but they felt different. And those feelings actually matter in how you might want to make a decision. The difference isn't about intelligence. It is not about math ability. It's about number instinct, that combination of magnitude perception and emotion. Numbers, despite how we think about them as being very objective, numbers don't often arrive emotionally neutral. They arrive carrying meaning and context and feeling. And most of the time, that reaction happens again before the analysis begins. As you noticed your reaction, did any of you feel a moment of surprise when you learned that the two statements were equivalent? Not so much. But it is the case, did you notice the difference in feeling nonetheless, even though you knew that they were equivalent? That moment of surprise is actually where learning lives when it comes to making better decisions with numbers. But let's look at another example. See if you're surprised by the next two statements. Each of the two statements is going to be about the likelihood that a mental patient will do something dangerous if he's released from a mental health facility. Okay, so that's the context. They're considering whether to release a mental patient from a mental health facility. Again, don't analyze them, just go with your immediate reaction. So which feels more dangerous? 10 chances out of 100 that the mental patient will be dangerous, or a 10% chance that a mental patient will be dangerous? Which one? Yeah, the one on the right or the one on the left feels more dangerous? Yeah, isn't that strange? It feels more dangerous, even though it's the same reality, but nonetheless, it feels more dangerous. They do describe the same, did that work? Oh yeah, here we go, okay. They do describe the same reality, but this is number instinct at work again. When we see the 10%, people tend to think about it as, well, it's small, it's abstract, it doesn't really matter. But when you see 10 out of 100, what often happens in the experiments that we run is people will say, well, I imagine someone going crazy and hurting someone. It's like the 10 brings up a different set of imagery for you, and you just think about it in a different way. Here's the key point. Their reaction was not wrong, and neither was yours. These are different perspectives on the same number, and neither one is wrong, or neither one is right, or both of them are right, neither of them is wrong. But again, the two statements do describe the same reality. So was anyone surprised that this time that the two statements were equivalent? Probably not so much, maybe a little bit with some people. Were you surprised that they felt different though? The example that we just saw highlights how frequency information, that's the representation on the right there, how frequency information can make risk feel more vivid and more emotionally powerful. Let's try one more example. This is my jelly bean task. I always like this task. Okay, so imagine you can draw one bean from one or the other of two bowls. And if you pick a colored bean, you can win $100. I sometimes actually do this in a classroom, by the way. The students love it. Go figure. But take a minute. Which bowl feels more appealing to you? People prefer, okay. Who prefers A? Okay. And who prefers B? Okay, we've got a little bit of a mixture. So in experimental settings, most people actually do prefer bowl A because, and can someone guess why? Why do people? There are more winners there. Like I can touch them, there are more winners. And that feels good, it feels very inviting to people. So there's 9 on the left and only 1 on the right. And it makes the 9 feel really great. You can feel that difference. But what if you're told about the same bowls, but in percentage terms? Bowl A offers a 9% chance of winning, bowl B offers a 10% chance. When the probability becomes more explicit, many people shift their preference to bowl B. Not everybody. Does anybody still prefer bowl A? A fair number of people, actually in the studies with undergrads, about 40% of them still prefer bowl A. And they talk about it just feels more inviting to them. It feels good to have 9 winners rather than 1. It might also be the stakes are fairly low. What changed, though, wasn't the bowls themselves. The bowls stayed the same that whole time, but it was the meaning that we attached to the numbers. Our instincts tend to originally respond to the larger number of winning beans rather than the probability. And these examples reveal something fundamental. Numbers don't simply describe reality, they shape how reality feels. Different formats, the number of beans or the percentage of beans, evoke different emotional meanings. And neither emotional meaning is wrong, they're just different. Understanding why numbers feel powerful begins with recognizing that numbers do carry emotional and interpretive meaning. And not only that, but you can have multiple instincts to the same number. We've been looking at that in all 3 of these examples. And multiple number instincts can coexist, even when you're looking at something as simple as this. In the end, what happens is that numbers kind of act like lenses. Each format brings certain features into focus while it blurs other features. But we can see one of the clearest examples of this effect show up in real life. Let's look at a real life example, going beyond my jelly beans, despite the fact that I love them. So imagine you're selling your home and you see a z-estimate. Everybody know z-estimates? Does anybody not know what they are? Okay. Yeah, they're pretty common. Oh yeah, so a z-estimate, Zillow is a fairly large company at this point, and they keep track of housing prices throughout the United States as best they can. They have an algorithm for doing it. It's a very imperfect algorithm, but if you put in your address on Zillow, you can find out the z-estimate for your house, which is Zillow's estimate of how much your house is worth right at this moment. And so this is not my house. This is, I don't even know whose house this is. I grabbed it from the web. But Zillow thinks that this house is worth $266,500. What's interesting is you can know that Zillow's estimate is imperfect. You can even think it's a whole bunch of nothing. And yet it becomes an anchor, even when you know about the imperfections of it. So that if you're trying to sell your house and you get an offer below that number, it's probably going to feel kind of disappointing. Offers above it may feel like success. The number hasn't changed your house, but it has changed your expectations. It's changed what you're paying attention to. It's changed your interpretation of those offers. Your realtor might then provide his own recommended price. Hopefully he does, or she does. Now, what ends up happening is that that recommended price becomes yet another anchor, and it will probably change your interpretation again. And here's a key insight, and something to think about in your own decisions. Whoever controls the comparison controls your interpretation. So you might be controlling the anchor, or someone else might be controlling it, but it's good to be aware of who's controlling the comparison. Many of us have experienced this kind of thing with home values or home estimates. And having a comparison, or even multiple comparisons, is a powerful way that numbers guide meaning, that guide interpretation. But you want to be sure that you're comparing to something meaningful, whether someone else is controlling that comparison or you're controlling the comparison that you're using. This ability to look at numbers from multiple viewpoints, we've been looking at this whole time, this idea that A number is not just objective reality. You can actually look at it from multiple viewpoints. And this ability to look at numbers from multiple viewpoints is one of the most important habits that we can develop for decision making. You can do this by transforming numbers from one frame to another and by comparing numbers to something meaningful. A 10% mortality rate can feel alarming. A 90% survival rate can feel very reassuring. They're the same reality. 10 chances out of 100 can feel vivid when it comes to a mental patient. You can almost see one of them going crazy and hurting someone. It's just the mental imagery that's brought up. But a 10% chance feels small and modest instead, even though they're the same reality. With comparisons, a 10% chance can feel modest when it's compared to an average of 20%, or it can feel scary if it's compared to an average of 5%. The 10% stayed the same. None of these interpretations are incorrect. Each frame highlights a different aspect of the same reality. The goal is not to find the right frame exactly. It's to recognize instead that when we explore multiple viewpoints, we allow different number instincts to emerge. And those multiple instincts can create a richer and a more stable understanding of the decision that faces you. Shifting perspectives like this is a protective habit, and it's a protective habit that can improve your decisions. When we learn to move among these multiple number instincts, rather than just react to the first one that appears or that's given to us, numbers do begin to feel less controlling, and they begin to feel more interpretable for us to make decisions in the way that we want. How are you doing out there? Doing good? All right. So experiencing multiple instincts toward the same number can create this kind of richer and more stable understanding of a decision. The decision maker then can experience these multiple emotional reactions, but the question is, why do we care? Like, why do we care that we might have multiple emotional reactions to a number? And the reason is because this is going to help numbers feel more powerful to us. And let's consider an example. Imagine experts have projected a 1% chance of wildfire damage to homes near you. Does that feel big or small? Kind of small, a 1% chance. Imagine instead that you hear that they've projected that 10 out of every 1,000 homes near you will be damaged in a wildfire. Big or small? A little bigger, yeah. Same number, different number? Same reality, yep. It makes a difference though. Suddenly the risk may feel more vivid, that the reality of the number hasn't changed, but the emotional meaning certainly has for almost everybody. And here's why that emotion is important. And it's our first reason for why numbers feel powerful. That emotional meaning influences action. It influences whether people protect their home, prepare for evacuation, or dismiss the risk entirely. The emotion is a motivator of action. Emotion helps translate those original magnitude instincts that we talked about into significance for our decisions. And then it does direct attention, it shapes interpretation, and it motivates action. With multiple emotions from different perspectives on the same number, the decision maker then can choose the perspective that makes the most sense, or they can think about how to blend those emotional reactions in ways that make the most sense for their decision. And this fuller picture can help the decision maker have a better and more informed decision. In this sense, emotion is not a bias that interferes with numerical reasoning. Instead, it's a mechanism. It's a mechanism through which numbers acquire meaning for decisions. And it's the bridge between magnitude and action, making numbers feel powerful. But that is not the only reason that numbers feel powerful. Anybody know what an Arabic integer is? It's a formal number. Is kind of an easy way of saying it. It's like 1, 2, 3, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are Arabic integers. They're just the numbers that we use every day. And if I wrote it out, T-H-R-E-E, that is not an Arabic integer. That's a verbal representation of an Arabic integer. The Arabic integer is the actual formal number. So that's just to introduce you to this slide, just to make sure we have definitions down. So you know now that emotion can sometimes mislead you, honestly, when you don't have a full picture of different realities that that number might represent. But it can also guide your actions when you do. What I want to look at with you now is how just the mere presence of numbers can actually kind of trick us. Let's talk about that a little bit. So imagine you're scrolling through a newspaper or an online newspaper, and you're looking at a news headline about ways that you might sleep better. And you see one or the other of 3 versions of the same story. And I'm going to show you all 3. You would have only seen one, of course, but I'm going to show you all 3 now. 3 ways to sleep better. Or 3 ways to sleep better. Or a few ways to sleep better. Most people gravitate toward the headline with the Arabic numeral. Nothing about the information changes. It changes a little for a few ways, but basically nothing about the information changes. But the number 3 feels more concrete, it feels more precise, and it's often perceived as more credible, more trustworthy. The symbol itself carries persuasive power. It's not that the Arabic numeral is better, it's not better, but Arabic integers are perceptually distinctive. They kind of float in a sea of letters, if nothing else, but they're also visually compact, they're symbolically precise, and in our culture, they're associated with measurement and with expertise. Because of these properties, they often capture attention, and they often signal importance, even when the informational value has not changed. In research that my colleagues and I have conducted, we found that headlines containing Arabic integers were more likely to be selected to read. So if you're online and you're looking at headlines and you're trying to decide what to click through, if there's an Arabic integer in that headline, you are more likely to click through. We have shown this on Washington Post headlines, Upworthy headlines, and then we've tested it in experiments to make sure that experimentally it looked correct. What happens is headlines containing Arabic numerals not only were more likely to be selected, but they were better remembered. People were more likely to remember the headline. And they were just perceived as more deserving of attention than even the logically equivalent verbal expression of T-H-R-E-E. It actually differs. The number itself wasn't adding new information, but its symbolic form influenced attention and influenced memory. What this illustrates is that numbers don't just communicate quantity. They do communicate quantity, but it goes beyond that. They also function as signals of precision and of importance. Arabic numerals capture attention simply through their symbolic presence, and that shapes engagement independent of informational content. So the influence of numbers goes beyond just how they're written. Sometimes the presence of a number doesn't just attract attention, it actually, and we're going to look at an experiment here, it's going to direct where attention goes. And when attention shifts, what feels important can shift too. There's research, fairly recent research by Chang, Melkman, and colleagues who take this argument further, and they demonstrate something subtle but very powerful, actually. When people evaluate options, when you're making a choice and you have, let's say, 2 options in front of you and you're deciding which one to pick, the attribute described with numbers tends to dominate decision making. Imagine a choice where one option is high in price and quality and the other is low in price and quality. We're often faced with decisions like that. Now, of course, you want higher quality and you want a lower price, but you can't get that this time. You're going to have to make a trade-off. You're going to have to pick either lower price or higher quality. Here's what the research shows. If price is expressed numerically, while quality is described with something like simple icons like star ratings, people focus more on the price. But if quality is described with numbers, and price is described with simple icons like dollar signs or something like that, attention shifts towards quality instead. In other words, providing numbers doesn't simply clarify information, it directs attention. And once that attention gets shifted, choice follows. Let's take a concrete example, though. Imagine you're choosing between two laptops. One description emphasizes the price numerically. So one laptop costs $899, the other one costs $949, okay? Quality is described vaguely with star ratings. People often focus on the price. But if price is shown more vaguely, like with dollar signs, and quality ratings are described with numbers, like 4.8 stars versus 4.2 stars, attention shifts towards quality instead, and the decision changes. The numbers haven't changed the laptops, but what they've changed is what feels important in the choice itself, and they changed what people actually chose. What this means is that you might ignore attributes that aren't described with numbers and overemphasize those attributes that are described with numbers, kind of automatically, because they shift your attention. Let's see how this feels, though. Imagine you're choosing a hotel room for your next vacation. Who's chosen a hotel room lately? Yeah, me too. And so, you often get information on price, you often get information on quality, at least a little. Here's your choice. Which one do you prefer? Again, don't overthink it. Just notice which one feels more appealing. Raise your hand if Hotel Milton feels more appealing. Okay? Raise your hand if Hotel Lux feels more appealing. Okay? A little bit of a mixture, maybe a little more towards Milton. In the experiments, people tend to prefer the less expensive Milton in this case. They also didn't get my lecture. For those of you who chose Hotel Milton, how did the difference in price make you feel? And how did the difference in ratings make you feel? What do you think?
The rating is subjective, the numbers are concrete.
Yeah, so the ratings are subjective, but the numbers are concrete. Did anybody else have a different reaction? Is that sort of common? Yeah.
Just that I've stayed in 3-star hotels and I've stayed in 5-star hotels, and I don't like 3-star hotels.
Yeah, okay. I don't like 3-star hotels. Yeah. So she said, I've stayed in 3-star hotels, I've stayed in 5-star hotels, I don't like 3-star hotels. Yeah, totally reasonable. But let's try again. Let's do the choice again in a slightly different way. And by the way, people were told, and I should have told you this for the other hotel choice, people were told here that each dollar bill means $100. And in the other case, they actually were told that each star meant, one more unit of, I forgot to tell you that part of it. So they literally were equivalent. But what do you prefer here, given these data? Who prefers Hotel Milton? Okay, still a few. Who prefers Hotel Lux? Yeah, many more people. For those of you who switched, what changed? I'm not sure who is talking.
There's no numeric value for Hotel Lux, so, it could be more affordable.
So,
Yeah, it doesn't say $400.
yeah, it doesn't say 400. So which one did you choose, though? Did you choose Hotel Lux or Hotel Milton here? Okay, so she chose Hotel Lux, but for her the price seemed I'm not sure if I'm going to capture your thoughts enough, but they seemed very subjective. You weren't quite sure how much it cost. Yeah, over here.
Something else comes into it for me. If I'm planning a vacation where I'm just going to sleep in that room, maybe not even have breakfast in the hotel, whatever they choose. It's like you're in Venice, you're going to be out looking around all the time because you're just feeling healthy and happy and exploratory.
Yeah.
But if you've had a bout with an illness or your work life has just taken it all out of you, and you just want to luxuriate and read books.
Yep.
Then you want a beautiful surrounding, because
Yep.
you're probably not going to go out walking around the room. You just can't handle it. You just want a change of pace, and you want to spoil yourself. So that, for me at least, would make a difference.
Yeah, and there's lots of things like that that influence our choices of hotels. What I find interesting about this example, though, is that even though those kind of values that we have, those kind of things that we want out of our hotel stay, even though those exist, people change preferences anyway between one of these representations versus the other one. Because despite having all of these other things that we want and that we value in life, just the simple representation of having a number or having a more qualitative star ends up making a difference to choices. Yeah, I think we've got someone there. I can't quite see
just
over
to
there.
add to the point, I think it also has to do with your economic status. Can you afford a 400-night-a-night hotel?
Absolutely.
If not, you're going to go with the 3.0.
Yep.
And hope it's good enough.
Yep.
So even if you're going on a vacation, I agree with Solveig about the fact that it depends what the context is. A vacation, is it a one-night stay? But can you afford it?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, things that we value and that we want make a huge difference. And if someone has a very strong preference like that, they can't afford a room like that, or they really just want to luxuriate on this particular vacation, these kind of different representations will not make as much of a difference. But for somebody who doesn't have a strong preference like that, or a desire, whatever, it will make a bigger difference. Let's see. Yeah, okay, we went through that. So what's interesting here is that in both choices, again, one attribute was described with numbers and one was described with simple icons. When price was described with numbers, people did tend to prefer the less expensive Milton in the experiments that were done. And they did experiments not just on hotels, but across a whole variety of different choices. But in this case, when quality was described with numbers instead, people tended to prefer the higher quality Lux hotel. Research shows that the attribute expressed numerically often becomes the focus of attention. The hotel rooms themselves didn't change, but what felt important might have changed, did change in fact, simply because a number appeared on one attribute instead of appearing on the other attribute. Providing numbers, again, doesn't just clarify information, it actually directs attention. Numeric information seems to act like a spotlight, and this is when we're using Arabic integers in particular. It acts like a spotlight, and wherever the number shines, attention follows to that attribute. And here's a key insight in decision making. When numbers act as spotlights, they can illuminate important aspects of a decision, but they can also leave other aspects of the decision that are equally important back off in the shadows. So even though you think it might be important, you may not end up paying as much attention to it. Sometimes we can sense that imbalance, a feeling that the illuminated number is persuasive, while something important remains unlit, and sometimes we can't. And what we're going to talk about after we're going to take a quick break, according to my leader here, is we're going to talk about how that prepares us to notice something. But we'll get to that in a moment. But I think now we stop for questions. I'm not quite sure how y'all do this.
This is Gwen Ellen, and I'll start with a question. In the M&Ms, does it matter the color? Because because of what might attract the eye versus...
Yeah, so yes, it would matter. I didn't pay any attention to that in that activity. I grabbed a couple of photos of M&Ms. But yes, you're right, it actually can. The kind of visual salience of things can make a difference. Let's see.
Hi, I'm Bob. One of the things you did not deal with in the illustration here, and by the way, it's very... my reaction to it is just as you're describing, the symbol, the numeric symbol really makes a difference. But the difference between the stars and the dollars, or the down below, is not just the symbol, but also the comparison. Because when you look at 100 versus 400, that's a 400% of the other. When you're on a scale of 1 to 5, that's a much smaller difference. And if you were using a comparable rating system, let's say 100 to 500, you might say the difference is very significant. I'm just saying the comparison is implicit as well.
Yeah, you know what you're actually pointing out is something about magnitude instinct that I didn't cover, but that's really interesting, that it's those proportions that make the bigger difference. And so if I had the exact same proportions on both of them, they would kind of be more equal as attributes and pulling in opposite directions. And it's a fundamental aspect of our instincts with magnitudes. It has to do with Weber's law, in case any of you wanted to know that. It had to do with Weber's law. Nothing you need to know about, but it's a really interesting part of that literature. Yeah.
On the M&Ms, I immediately noticed that there were 2 of each of the major colors in there, and that there was only one black and one whatever the one was. And so therefore, the hand holding the little the 8 was much better. And then on the example that you gave with the 10% chance compared to 10 out of 100.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Compared to 10 out of 100, I immediately went to, what about 1 in 10?
Yeah.
Which to me, that sounded dangerous somehow. That 1 in 10, that sounds much more threatening.
Why do you think that is?
Because, in the 10%, that seems like a small number compared to 100. 1 in 10 seems like a much smaller gradient. Is that what it is, the gradient?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the proportions are the same. 1 out of 10, 10 out of 100. There's not good data on this in the literature. I share your intuition, but the times I've seen it tested, sometimes your prediction comes true, sometimes it actually doesn't. What I think might happen for at least some people is that it's easier to picture one person than it is to picture 1 out of the 10. And so I think that's what's going on. But honestly, the data is sort of meh in terms of the support. I kind of agree with you, though.
Okay. And then just in terms of your star ratings and things like that, that I've become very suspicious of Amazon when, you have the 4 and the 5-star ratings and things like that, because there's a difference to me between 4.1 and 4.8.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Can we assume that most industries and commercially related companies and I'm Helmut.
Nice to meet you.
Have really looked through this a lot as a way of mind control?
How will I say this gently? Yes. Well, I'm making fun. I think that companies have a pretty good intuitive sense of how this works. I'm not sure that they've studied it explicitly, but people certainly use anchors on us. People certainly put some comparisons in front of us and not other comparisons. People certainly put small numbers, 4 out of 5 doctors prefer, or dentists, or whoever it is, as ways of influencing us, because that's what they're supposed to do. I mean, they're companies, they're making money. It actually is what they're supposed to do. What I would argue is that we should take charge of that, though, for our own decisions, and that we should be aware of what are the kind of tricks that someone can play on us, the kind of ways, even if they're not doing it intentionally, but that's going to sway our decisions nonetheless. Because once you become more aware of that, you can actually change those representations as we're talking about, or you can ask somebody else for help in changing that representation if you're not sure how to do it, and you can take better charge of your decisions. Yeah, and I'll actually touch on that later in the talk a little bit.
Hi. Hey. So it's a related question. Oh, I'm Neely. Hi.
Hi, Neely.
It's a related question to how we get manipulated by numbers. And I am pretty sure Amazon has algorithms that it's not an intuitive feeling. They figured it out using algorithms, as have many other companies. But on a political side, when we get numbers, they are designed to drive emotions, which drive decisions. And how do you protect yourself? First of all, how much do you trust the information? But also, how do you interpret the information? How do you look at the other side of it in order to feel the way you feel about the numbers?
Do you have a concrete example you could give me?
Measles, that's a good example, right? If you say 1 out of 10 people in this community 10 children have died from measles, or say 9 kids out of 10 have not died. Something like that. I mean, I'm thinking bigger. I'm thinking percentages, like numbers that show numbers of people injured in an incident or in war.
Yeah.
And how do we interpret that? But that's a good concrete example.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And your example also includes part of what I would do. And part of what I would do is you're usually given one representation, and I would think about it in other representations, and I would think about how the feelings towards each of those representations resonates with me and my values in a decision. Because one representation is going to feel more vivid and emotional. Another representation is going to feel more pallid and abstract. And so thinking through those representations, feeling those emotions and lack of emotions, and what do you think is most appropriate in that decision? There's not going to be a right answer. The answer is to feel those multiple representations and consider it within how you want to think about the situation. So for me, when I was thinking about my rheumatoid arthritis treatment decision, I could have thought about the one chance in 1,000 the one person out of 1,000 that was going to get cancer. And that could have come up in like massive imagery for me. And I even allowed that to happen for a moment. Like I really did. I kind of thought through each of the numbers. But in the end, what felt most real to me was that 999 out of 1,000 that didn't get cancer. And what felt most real to me was, okay, there's not a right answer here. I know there's a trade-off, but I'm going to make that trade-off. And I'm going to make that trade-off having thought through the different sides and knowing that I'm taking a risk, but also knowing that there's a tremendous potential benefit for me. And so it was thinking through the decision and evaluating the trade-offs. And we're going to talk about, I'll summarize these kind of simple habits towards the end, but we're also going to talk about at least one more. I've forgotten how many more there are.
Hi, this is Joan.
Hi, Joan.
It's very interesting, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
But it seems as though, well, I consider these emotional reactions, in some cases, like what Neely was talking about, to be a problem. It seems to me as though people who are educated to know that 1 in 10 and 10 in 100 are exactly the same thing would not have the same sort of emotional reaction. I mean, do people do studies with, and you don't need to be a mathematician. I mean, I think most of us learned that sort of thing in elementary school. So, do you think part of the reason is a lack of understanding of what numbers really mean?
Yeah, so you're getting into the actual research results here. And so what does happen, let's take the 90% survival, 10% mortality. What happened, so let me back up a moment. What I have often studied, I call numeracy. And it's essentially just math ability. How good are you at math? How not as good are you at math? And if you show somebody who's good at math, you show them 90% mortality, or you show them 10%, well, the other way, sorry, 90% survival, let's not do it the other way, or 10% mortality, it actually doesn't make that much of a difference to them which one you showed. which one you show them. And it's for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. When they see the 90%, they transform it into the 10%. Now, if you ask them, they do oftentimes feel something different from the two representations. But they do the transformation so that their ultimate reaction to a decision, for example, is not very different. Someone who is less good at math, they show much more of a difference. And so you're absolutely right in that sense. The other thing that's interesting for the people who are very good with numbers, if you show them one or the other, and then later you ask them which one they saw, they can't remember. And it's because they made it salient for themselves. And so you absolutely see those kind of things happen within research studies. And the same thing is true for the 10% and the 10 out of 100. The comparisons, there's not as much of a difference. But with the other ones, there is a difference. What I would argue is that nonetheless, even though you might respond about the same to either one, that in your decisions, it's actually important to feel the emotion of this one and to feel the emotion of this one and think through what it means for you in trade-offs that you might be making. Now, would I do this for a breakfast cereal choice? No. But if I was faced with a choice about treating my lung cancer or some other, buying a house, some big decision, yes, I would. Yeah. So I agree with you, but I think there's more to it also.
Okay. We'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 11:10.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get back into our seats, quiet down, get back into our seats, and go for the second half here. And while you're meandering to your seats, I will go ahead and tell the second joke of the day. Okay, that must get everybody's attention. Okay, so the English book asked the math book why she was so sad. Do you know what the math book said? Because I have so many problems.
All right, I'm kind of a lover of the corny jokes. They're fun. Okay, so we were talking about this idea that when you have a decision to make, and some of the attributes are, some of the information that you have is presented with numbers, and some of it is not presented with numbers. It's more kind of like simple icons or something like that. That numbers just draw our attention. It's like there's a spotlight on them. And the other information tends to recede into the background a little bit. And sometimes we can sense that imbalance, that there's kind of a feeling that the illuminated numbers are persuasive in some way that maybe they shouldn't be, while there's something else that's important there that we're not paying attention to. And sometimes you can kind of sense that feeling. And that shift does prepare us to notice something else too that's important in decisions, and that we're going to talk about now. And it's a subtle signal that appears when information feels persuasive maybe, but it also feels incomplete in some way. Sometimes when a number grabs our attention, or some other information grabs our attention, we experience a quiet sort of internal reaction. A sense, again, that information provided feels persuasive maybe before we understand it. And it's combined with the feeling that it's maybe incomplete, or it's misleading, or it's even incorrect perhaps. And that subtle reaction is actually important, and it's something to pay attention to. It's not a strong emotional reaction. It's kind of a flicker of uncertainty that I call a feeling of wrongness. It's not a gut feeling in the traditional sense. It's more of sort of a cognitive signal that kind of invites us to pause and to look more carefully, like there's something else there that's interesting that I need to consider. You might notice this feeling when a statistic sounds really impressive, but it lacks context, or a risk is described, but there's no baseline. I'll explain that in a little while. Or when just a number grabs your attention, but you really don't understand what it means. It also can happen when a number simply isn't there, but you feel like it should be. like in my rheumatoid arthritis choice that I had to make. And this feeling of wrongness is just your mind's way of whispering that something interesting is happening here, and it's not quite all there. When we ignore that signal, we tend to react automatically to numbers as they're presented to us, or to information as it's presented to us. We accept the impressive statistic, we react to the risk, or we make a decision based on incomplete information. But we can also learn to tune into that signal. And when we do start to develop this important habit, we create space to ask questions in a decision and to become better informed, and ultimately to make better judgments. The feeling of wrongness is not a sign that you're bad with numbers. It's a sign that you're paying attention and that there's something else going on there. And it's a doorway to better judgment. It often appears not as confusion exactly, but as unease or as curiosity even. And so if this quiet pause signal exists, an obvious question follows from that. And that's why does it matter? Again, kind of why do we care kind of question. Why should we pay attention to a feeling that's often subtle, it's fleeting, and it is actually really easy to ignore? I mean, isn't it easier if you're faced with a decision, just use the information in front of you as is? It's a much simpler way of doing it. It's more complicated. It's a little harder to do the kinds of things that I'm suggesting. To pay attention to, there might be something wrong there. I feel this little flicker of uncertainty. And then it's harder, of course, to do like some of those transformations of numbers that we were talking about in order to experience different viewpoints on the same number, to experience different number instincts. But the answer that you might not want to ignore this particular signal is that it actually plays an important role in how we interpret numbers and make decisions, and it helps to protect our autonomy in decisions. I'm going to give you an example. The feeling of wrongness matters because it interrupts automatic reactions and it invites deeper interpretations. And there's a really good concrete example from back in the 1960s. Anybody hear about the drug thalidomide? Yeah, a lot of people here know about it. So back in the early 60s, a drug called thalidomide was being widely prescribed in Canada and Europe to treat morning sickness among people who are pregnant. The numbers available at the time suggested it was perfectly safe. Again, it's being used widely in Canada and Europe. The evidence appeared reassuring, and there was really strong pressure to approve the drug in the United States. But FDA reviewer Frances Oldham Kelsey experienced something subtle as she was considering the data on the drug, a sense that something was missing. She had concerns about the lack of evidence regarding the drug's safety. She questioned whether the numbers provided by the pharmaceutical company really fully captured potential risks. And she knew something from her earlier work about the mechanism that causes birth defects, and she was curious. She wasn't quite sure. And so she paused. She listened to that little flicker of uncertainty and she paused. And she paused the FDA down cold. She requested animal studies to demonstrate that the drug would not be harmful to the fetus. Despite the fact that thalidomide was already, again, it was widely used in Europe and Canada, she remained suspicious. And she scrutinized the data that she got with concern and with skepticism, and she asked for more. Her pause was not driven by fear. It was driven by attention to what the numbers did not yet reveal. She requested additional evidence, she delayed approval, she did it again, and she did it again. That decision ultimately prevented widespread birth defects in the United States. She was called a heroine on the front page of the Washington Post. Her pause caused Congress to strengthen drug regulation. Her choice was not about certainty. She wasn't positive. She had a flicker of uncertainty. What it was about recognizing that persuasive numbers can still be incomplete. In a very different and a much smaller way, I experienced something similar when I was making my own treatment decision. The information I was given was informative, but it didn't feel complete, and I didn't like that. And that quiet sense of incompleteness became a signal to pause and to ask more questions. And that made all the difference to me, and that made all the difference to the United States at the time. Frances Kelsey's decision reflects something important. The feeling of wrongness is not a sign that something is definitely wrong. It's a signal that something might be incomplete, it might be incorrect, you're just not sure. And a helpful way to think about it is as a smoke alarm. A smoke alarm doesn't tell you that there is a fire, thank goodness. We'd have had many fires in my house otherwise from all the food that I've burnt. It does not tell you that there is a fire. It tells you to stop, though, and to look more carefully. And the pause is then that moment of investigation when you're asking questions. And it's a key habit to working better with numbers and making better decisions with numbers. And let's look at what that might look like. So I want you to imagine that your doctor has prescribed you a new treatment. And let's see what he said. The new treatment is going to reduce your risk by 40%. What's your reaction to that? Okay, I can't hear anybody, but risk of what? Yeah. What are your feelings about this, though, first? I agree with you about the questions. Oh, well, risk of what? Okay, let me make something up. The new treatment reduces your risk of cancer of some sort by 40%.
And where's the risk to begin with? 40% of what's the starting risk?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're going to get to that. When you just see this, though, and you're being told this by a doctor, does it feel reassuring? Does it feel informative? Yeah, pretty much. But now imagine your smoke alarm went off and something feels incomplete. You want to ask a question. You're not quite sure what's going on. What question might you ask before just reacting to these data? I've heard one. You had a question to ask. You said compared to what?
Is it 40% of 50% chance, or is it 40% of a 2% chance?
Yeah, absolutely.
Repeat that.
Yeah, so compared to what is sort of the big question, but what he's asking, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. You're Paul. Nice to meet you, Paul. What Paul's asking is it 40% of 50% or is it 40% of 2%? And so what he's asking is what's the baseline risk? He's asking what the baseline is. You could also ask what format is being used. Maybe you don't want it in percentage terms, you want to think about it in frequentistic terms. That's possible too. You might want to ask what might be missing. So there's different questions that when you see information like that and it doesn't quite feel right, there are different questions that you can ask. And this is kind of what the pause looks like in practice. It's not about rejecting the number that you got. It's not about rejecting that 40%. It's also not about calculating immediately. It's simply stopping to investigate and ask some questions. So next, and this goes directly to your point, Paul, you find out that your absolute risk, well, it decreases from 5% to 3%. This is logically identical to a 40% reduction. That is a 40% reduction. So does this information change how the number feels? Does it feel, so for some people it doesn't change at all. For other people it does. For those of you where it changed your feeling, does it feel more reassuring? Does it feel more unimportant? How does it feel to you? Maybe less important, at least for some of you? Yeah. Your earlier reaction wasn't wrong. You were looking at one way of looking at the information. And now you have another way of looking at it too. And with each of those different ways of looking at the same number, it's just that a different number instinct emerges. And then you can think about which of these are important to me and which of these are less important to me, or you can try to blend across those feelings. But some people end up feeling reassured by the new information. Some just feel less impressed. I think that was more common here. Some feel like, I'm not sure. But the important insight here is that multiple number instincts can exist at the same time, and that we're not all going to feel the same about it either. If we translate the format again, which we can, yet another instinct may emerge, even though these numbers again are logically identical to that 40% reduction. The pause did not replace one instinct with another. It just revealed additional instincts, different ways of feeling about the same situation. And these simple habits can help you gain different perspectives on the same situation. The pause, again, does not eliminate uncertainty. The uncertainty is still there. It just reveals additional number instincts. And it transforms uncertainty into questions at least. It transforms it into inquiry. And that inquiry is where better decisions can start to emerge, especially in very important decisions. The smoke alarm isn't asking you to panic. It's just asking you not to keep cooking on the stove until at least you've checked out what else is going on. Corny jokes, okay? There's some really good number ones, actually. My husband knows I can never remember jokes. But there are three kinds of people. Some who can count and some who can't count. That's a usual one. I gave a talk once at a society of actuaries. Is anybody in the room an actuary? Oh my gosh, they tell the worst jokes about themselves. How do you know if someone in an elevator, how do you know if an actuary is extroverted when you're in an elevator? Well, he looks at your shoes instead of his own. Worst jokes ever. Okay, so I personally had been planning on taking a break here. I hadn't realized how the group worked, so we're going to continue on. Okay, so up to this point in the talk, we've looked at how numbers guide attention. We've looked at how they shape meaning. We've looked at how they even signal authority and can distort priorities as well. What's striking is that the instincts we've explored don't actually stay confined to one domain. The reactions that appear in health decisions often reappear in other domains, like finance or parenting, everyday consumer choices. They're sort of common. There are common patterns across domains. The numbers might change, the domain might change, but the instincts repeat. And this is our next simple habit, to begin recognizing these patterns in different situations. So we've been talking about number instincts mostly in health decisions, because that's most of what I've studied. But again, these instincts rarely stay in one single domain. They actually cross. The context and numbers change, but the patterns in how the numbers shape our attention and how emotions emerge, those repeat across situations. And when instincts travel into these different domains, our relationship with numbers can begin to change. We can stop treating each numeric encounter as something that's unfamiliar, and we can start to recognize the patterns and use them in different domains. We can look actually at another one of my decisions where something similar happened to me as what I told you about before. So after making my treatment decision for rheumatoid arthritis, I began noticing that the same kind of things repeated across different situations. And months later, I was working with a financial advisor. And he provided me with a document, as they do, that included projected returns, it included probabilities, and a really reassuring performance chart. And at first glance, the numbers felt really persuasive, and I was just kind of like, yeah, let's do that. Much like I had that same response to the doctor earlier. Originally, I was just like, okay, yeah, let's do it your way. But then something subtle happened, and a familiar reaction started to kind of occur for me. It was not fear, it was not confidence yet, because I really didn't know what I was doing, but it was a quiet sense that the numbers were informative, but they weren't complete for me. It was the same instinct that had surfaced during my earlier medical decision. So instead of reacting immediately, I paused, and I began asking questions. Compared to what? What might the numbers not be showing? I wanted to know more about what he was showing me, but also what he was not showing me. And I asked for the numbers again. I wanted to know how his recommendation compared to other ways I could invest my money. But I wanted to know that also under different potential market scenarios. I wanted to know how my likely experience of returns would feel over time as markets went up and markets went down, because they always do. Because I knew that that's what was going to be important to me. I mean, I certainly wanted my retirement funds to do well, but I also wanted to feel good about the choices and the trade-offs that I had made. Nothing about the advisor changed in that moment, but my relationship with the numbers did, with the new information that he provided and that I was able to find on my own. I wasn't trying to eliminate uncertainty. You can't do that in the stock market. I wasn't trying to distrust the numbers that he provided me either. I was just recognizing a familiar pattern in how numbers felt, And I was responding with curiosity. And I was responding with questions. I might have been annoying, but I was responding with questions rather than automatic acceptance. And that experience made something clear to me. The instincts we experience with numbers aren't confined to specific domains. They travel across different domains, and they're useful. And of course, and we had this pointed out to us earlier, numbers don't just influence individual decisions. So far, we focused on numbers that we actively interpret. Whoops, hang on one moment. I'm actually on the wrong slide. I apologize. I forgot to go forward a couple of times. So far, we focused on numbers that we actively interpret in decisions. But increasingly, we live in environments that are shaped by numbers that interpret us. And we make that make decisions about us even before we get to make those decisions. Some of the examples that might pop to mind are things like credit scores, insurance risk scores, including home insurance lately, resume screening for some people. A lot of what's happening now is that a number is being put on us, and it's making decisions for us. In these environments, understanding number instincts is not only personal, it's environmental. It's about what's going on around us and making decisions for us. The environment that we're operating in has changed enormously over the last years. We don't encounter numbers occasionally anymore. We practically live inside them in some ways. Our health is tracked by blood tests and sleep scores. Our finances are summarized by credit ratings and investment dashboards. Our daily lives are shaped by step counts and other kinds of ratings. And these numbers don't just describe reality, they frame it. They highlight certain aspects of our lives. They obscure other aspects of our lives, and they subtly guide our attention and our choices as well. Our reactions to these numbers aren't just personal quirks. They're actually responses to a numeric ecosystem, a larger environment that's designed to capture our attention and that's designed to shape our behaviors. You may have noticed that some numbers feel authoritative even when you're not entirely sure what they mean. We talked about this a little bit earlier on. Anyone have an example of that? What's an example of a number that feels authoritative even when you're not sure what it means? Political polls? Yeah? Body mass index, that's a great one. Say that one again. Cholesterol numbers? Yeah, all of those numbers we get from doctors. Cholesterol, blood pressure, heart rate. Yeah, all of these things. If you think about credit scores, a lot of people trust that number deeply. It's like, this is part of me, this is part of how I'm, this is sort of a stamp on me in some ways. Well, we really don't know how it's calculated. We don't really know what goes into it. And if that sounds familiar to you, you're not alone. That's true for a lot of numbers that sort of govern our lives at this point. If you could reflect silently for a moment, have you ever felt evaluated by a number you didn't fully understand? And as you think about that moment, notice the reaction that accompanied it. Did you feel evaluated by a number that you didn't understand? Did the number feel confusing, frustrating, unfair, reassuring maybe, but unclear? Yeah.
So I remember, my name's Kathy, I remember once there was an article in the Station Journal about someone who had been hit by a car. They were 66 years old and they described him as an elderly gentleman. That's definitely a judgment call.
Yeah. Yeah, so she ran across a newspaper article of someone who's 66 years old and was described as elderly. And how did this make you feel, Kathy?
Well, just that, you just relate it always to yourself.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, oh yeah. Notice how it's changed quite a bit as we've gotten older. Who seems old has changed enormously. I remember babysitting for this ancient 30-year-old couple when I was about 12 years old. I don't feel that way anymore, by the way. But what is striking is how common this experience has been, that we have some number that's out there in the external world, and it ends up becoming important to us because it's kind of pushed upon us, even though we don't always really know what it is or what it means, or how to control it, even. We often encounter numbers that influence opportunities without it being transparent to us. That would be something like your credit score influencing what mortgage rates that you get offered. There's very little transparency about how they were constructed. In these moments, our number instinct is often the first signal that something deserves attention, even when the number itself might feel opaque, that it might be worth a little more attention to figure out what's going on and how can you perhaps exert control over it, or at least understand it. When numbers operate transparently, we can interpret them more fully. But when they operate invisibly, like things like credit scores, and when we don't fully understand how they're constructed, interpretation actually becomes quite difficult. In these moments, our instincts are often, again, that first signal that something deserves attention, something deserves investigation, questions that you could ask. And that's why understanding number instincts matter, not only for personal decisions, but for navigating environments that are shaped by invisible numerical judgments about us. Sometimes the number ends up feeling like it knows more about us than we know about it. The gap between influence and understanding often ends up influencing our emotional reactions. Sometimes there's confusion because a number just feels opaque. Sometimes there's frustration because the stakes are quite meaningful to us. Sometimes there's this sense of just powerlessness because the evaluation feels external and we can't do anything about it. And then sometimes there's curiosity because the number clearly matters and maybe I can find out more. These reactions aren't signs necessarily of misunderstanding. They're signals that you're navigating an environment that's shaped by invisible numerical judgments. Again, have you ever noticed your credit score changing without fully even knowing why it changed? I get these little micro changes in my credit scores all the time, and I'm like, why did that happen again? And I rarely know. When numbers operate invisibly, our relationship with them changes. The challenge then is no longer simply interpreting numbers. It's living with numbers that influence our own outcomes, even when their meaning is not fully transparent. And in those environments, what matters, I would claim, is not eliminating the emotional reactions that you're having, but developing steadiness with numbers. And this is true for personal decisions as well. So the goal is not to master numbers or eliminate uncertainty. We cannot eliminate uncertainty in our lives. So many choices we make, we're like, okay, maybe this will happen, maybe that'll happen. I just have to make my trade-offs and I have to move on. But instead, the goal is to relate to numbers with steadiness, to feel more confident in what you're doing, to know what you can do and what you can't do. Steadiness doesn't mean certainty. Again, we can't get rid of the uncertainty. And it doesn't mean trusting numbers automatically, nor distrusting numbers automatically. But it does mean recognizing our number instincts and pausing to ask questions when something seems incomplete or misleading or even incorrect. And doing so will help you see the important trade-offs that exist in decisions. Using numbers without being used by them is actually less about technical skill, because we don't need that much math in everyday decisions. So it's less about technical skill, and it's more about emotional understanding, and then making those trade-offs that have to be made. One important aspect of steadiness with numbers is recognizing limits, though. Not everybody has the same math ability. Not everybody has the ability to work with percentages, for example, or translate a percentage into a frequency. People differ in their abilities. Some numeric tasks are really simple to interpret. Others involve translations or probabilistic reasoning or contextual knowledge that just may not feel intuitive. Even someone who's very good at math is sometimes going to run across situations that are more difficult than they know how to do. That's just a fact of life. That's just how it works. And so steadiness doesn't mean solving every numeric problem independently by yourself. It also includes recognizing when you deserve assistance from someone else and asking for that assistance. Whether that assistance involves translating formats or clarifying assumptions or sharing the decision, or in my case, back in my rheumatoid arthritis decision, I actually was not able to find that data on my own. I asked a friend, and that was how I reached out for assistance. In research examining health and financial decisions, people did tend to do well when how confident they were and how much they understood were aligned together, when they were in sync, including when individuals recognized their own limits and they sought assistance. And so, like in my RA decision, as I was saying, I didn't know how to find that data, and so my friend helped me find it, but I did know how to compare the numbers. I knew how to compare 45% to 15%. I didn't need help with that. And I did happen to know how to convert that a 0.1% chance. I did know how to convert that into the frequency formats that I wanted to understand better. And so I kind of knew what I knew, and I knew what I didn't know. And when I didn't know something, I reached out for help. I reached out for assistance. This awareness of limits is not a weakness, it's a strength. This awareness of limits is a strength. It's part of steadiness with numbers. It reflects a relationship with numbers that's not grounded in, I have to do this all by myself, but in an alignment, with in a matching between your confidence and your actual understanding. In a moment, I'll introduce a term that's often used in research to describe that alignment. But first, I just want to talk about the idea that steadiness with numbers isn't a single skill. It emerges from a set of small habits, some of which, and we've been talking about those small habits, that help us to interpret numbers without reacting automatically. So steadiness with numbers isn't a personality trait. It's not that this person is steady and that person is not steady. It's actually built from a small set of habits that can be used across situations, and you need to use different habits in different situations. It's not that they all apply to every single situation. Although this one kind of does. The first is to pause before reacting, not to reject the number, just to give yourself a moment and ask whether there are any important questions here. Do I want to know compared to what? Do I want to know, is there any information missing here? You might want to compare to something meaningful, but what do you want to compare to? What's meaningful in that situation? Is it compared to average? Is it compared to last year? Is it compared to your neighbor? Is it compared to your own goals? You want to control the comparison, because whoever controls your comparison is going to control your interpretation. You might want to translate the format. A percentage can feel abstract, like we were talking about. A frequency can feel vivid. Alternatively, a different way of translating a format, one frame of information, 9% die, might feel negative, while its numeric equivalent might feel positive. Seeing both and reflecting on both often reveals more. You might want to ask whether something's missing. What assumptions are built into the projection? What isn't being measured, or what isn't being shown to me? And finally, as we were talking about a moment ago, you might want to seek help when needed. Some numeric tasks deserve collaboration. Confidence aligned with understanding includes knowing when to ask, knowing just when to ask for some help with something. None of these habits require advanced math. They require awareness and curiosity, and also a little bit of arithmetic. And over time, these habits change how decisions feel. Which of these feels natural to you? Which of them are more of a stretch for you? Do any of these feel natural to people already, like they're doing them already? I was really surprised. I was going through this talk with my daughter yesterday, and she did all this stuff. Now, she's been listening to my research for years, the poor child. But still, I was so happy. What feels natural? To ask for help? Yeah, that's a great one. What feels like a bit of a stretch? I'll bet asking for help is a stretch for some people, at least. That can be tough for people. The pausing feels like a stretch? Why does it feel like a stretch?
Because I don't pause, I react.
Yeah. Yeah. So she doesn't pause, she reacts because the information's in front of you. Why would you pause? And yet, pausing can help. Pausing can help you see the situation more fully. You get a fuller picture. And again, I would not do this for a choice among breakfast cereals. But some decisions deserve a pause. Thalidomide, that deserved a pause. Yeah.
Ask what's proceeding. I think a good example when you talk about getting the diagnosis and reduces your risk by this much. When you look at the medical labs of television today, they have a whole list of side effects.
Yeah.
And I think you also want to know what are those side effects and what's the possibility of getting those.
Yes. Thank you. So, sorry. So, yeah, I should know that better. So what the gentleman over here was saying was that when it comes to like deciding about a new treatment, that there's always a whole list of side effects, kind of a whole slew of things that might go wrong if you take the medication. And he's wondering, why do we never get probabilities? Why do we never get the likelihood that those side effects would happen? And I have such a good answer for you, I can't even tell you. I used to be the chair of the Food and Drug Administration's Risk Communication Advisory Committee. And oh my gosh, did we talk about this? Because when you provide people with that likelihood of side effects, it makes a huge difference. It helps them put the side effects into context. It helps them understand the risks better. What it actually does is people are less likely to overestimate the risks, and they're more likely to take medications that are recommended by the doctor. The same thing happens, though, and I'm surprised you didn't say this, although we're often not given the percentage benefit. We're told that it will reduce this cancer risk, get rid of your headaches or whatever it is, but we're not told the benefits. And the likelihood benefits, if people are told that, it's often lower than they thought. And so they actually like the medication a little bit less. Because if you think about my RA treatment example, those numbers were kind of low, weren't they? I have a 45% chance of remission with the new drug and only a 15% chance with the other drug. And that means a whole bunch of people are not going into remission. So benefits can be lower than people expect. But that's a great question. I agree. I always want that. I go look it up sometimes. You know, this is what we do. Other comments? Yeah. Could she have a microphone for the question?
How much longer do you have?
Oh, I have, no, I have probably 6 more slides. Yeah, sorry, okay, I was just asking for examples. I figure activities are okay. Is that not okay? Okay, we're gonna stop doing this. Let's move on. I can't just talk for 2 hours, though. I'm not even capable of that. Okay, but I'm gonna do it for the rest of this time anyway. Okay, so these habits, as I was saying before, they're not going to eliminate uncertainty for you in a decision, and they are a bit more work. And so you have to decide when it's worthwhile doing this and when it's not for you. But they do change how decisions feel, and they make an enormous difference sometimes. And that shift does become visible when we revisit some of the earlier decisions, like my RA story. When I revisit and think about that earlier decision, because I actually do think about it a lot, it was a very important decision to me, and I was going against what a doctor was recommending. But what stands out to me is that I didn't expect statistics to eliminate uncertainty. I knew they weren't going to. I also noticed that instinct signals, I also noticed that these instincts were going to signal things to me, but I wasn't going to be controlled by them. That I wanted to notice them, but not pay too much attention to them. I paused naturally when something felt incomplete. That actually is a natural thing for me. And I made trade-offs explicitly, and I wanted to be making those trade-offs. The decision wasn't fearless or perfectly confident, but it did feel steady, which was great. I loved that. These numbers appeared earlier in the talk. They haven't changed, but the way they feel might have changed by now as we've talked through these. Some now may invite curiosity rather than an automatic reaction. Some may feel less persuasive now that without some kind of a context for them. Some evoke multiple interpretations rather than a single one. What changed is not the numbers, but an awareness of how numbers change meaning. Before we give this experience a name, it's worth pausing to remember what we mean by steadiness with numbers. Steadiness is not certainty, it's not distrust, and it's not mathematical expertise. It's the ability to notice how numbers feel, to pause when something feels incomplete, to ask questions with curiosity, and make decisions while recognizing trade-offs. It's the quiet confidence that comes from understanding that numbers inform decisions, but they rarely resolve them. It's not like the numbers are going to say, do this, but it's going to help you better see what the trade-offs are. Steadiness doesn't mean every number makes sense. It means numbers no longer make us lose our balance, at least. And that shift, the movement from reaction to more steadiness, is something researchers have given a name, and it's called calibration. Calibration refers to the alignment between how confident we feel in a decision and how well we actually understand the numeric information that's in front of us. But what matters most is not the terminology. It doesn't make a difference if you remember that word calibration. What matters is the experience that we've been exploring today. And that word calibration just follows from that. Numbers are powerful. Numbers are powerful. But their power comes from how they guide attention, interpretation, and confidence. Calibration doesn't require advanced math. It requires awareness, curiosity, and it requires practice. It reflects both who we are and how we respond to situations. And ultimately, calibration is about autonomy. It's about our autonomy, the ability to engage with numbers as tools rather than as signals of authority. Fluency with numbers is not about certainty. It's about alignment between what we feel, what we know, and ultimately what we decide. Today we explored a simple but powerful idea. Numbers do more than inform decisions. Instead, they shape how decisions feel. We saw how numbers guide attention and signal authority, how they create urgency and they sometimes distort priorities, as we mentioned before. But we also saw that protection doesn't come from rejecting them. It comes from calibration. It comes from working with those numbers. Calibration reflects, it does reflect enduring tendencies. Some of us tend to be more calibrated than others, but it also reflects moment-to-moment awareness in a decision situation. And it is that ability to pause and compare and to transform formats and develop richer number instincts over time. And ultimately, it's about autonomy and taking charge of your own decisions. When I returned to my own decision about RA treatment, the choice wasn't easy and it wasn't risk-free, but it was calibrated. I noticed my reactions. I asked for comparisons. I developed stronger number instincts. I did all of the things. It didn't remove my uncertainty, but it transformed the uncertainty into a decision that I could own for myself. If I had to summarize today's talk in a single slide, it would look something like this. First, numbers guide attention. They highlight some aspects of reality, but they leave other aspects in shadow. You don't even notice them. Be aware of this so you don't unintentionally ignore aspects of decisions that actually are important to you. Second, number instinct shapes meaning. Before we calculate, we often feel. And magnitude and emotion tend to combine to create our first impressions. Third, the pause, taking a pause, creates some space for you. It interrupts automatic reactions and it invites curiosity so that you can create multiple perspectives for yourself by comparing numbers and translating formats. Sometimes the pause tells us that more information is needed, and you can request more data at that point. What you can do in this pause can be done independently by yourself, or it can be done in collaboration with others. Depends on your comfort level. It depends on your ability. Over time, confidence and understanding can align. They can become more in sync so that you know better what you know and what you don't know. But that comes with practice. And again, it doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It just reduces that mismatch. And finally, habits build autonomy. Not advanced math, not perfect accuracy, but habits, and hopefully autonomy. The calibrated mind, or if you prefer to think about it as the steady mind, isn't defined by technical fluency, it's defined by awareness. Awareness of yourself, learning to know yourself better. Awareness of how numbers influence you, and the ability to respond with curiosity rather than with automatic trust or automatic avoidance. And I believe that is it. Thank you. Yeah, so this is a book that I have written. I have to say this is an academic book, and so I don't necessarily recommend it for y'all, although I'd be thrilled if you tried it out. I am hoping to write a more lay public version of the book, and actually y'all were my guinea pigs today as I'm sort of trying to figure out what I want to put in the book. So I really appreciate your time and your attention. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ann. I really appreciate this because you're basically saying that people who panic and have ill numeracy can have autonomy in how they begin to approach numbers. And I think this is really helpful because a lot of people feel shame around numbers and they panic.
Yeah.
My question to you is, what are some additional tips you might have for those of us who are dang good with words and rationalize the hell out of everything? What are some of the tips for us to coach those people who panic and freeze in the face of numbers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a series of things you can do. Some of them are harder and some of them are easier. So some of the harder ones is to practice with numbers, to actually practice doing simple arithmetic. But the way you have to practice is you have to see a problem and actually do it, actually guess the answer and then get feedback. We don't learn unless we learn, what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. That's a hard one. There actually is. I was telling someone earlier, there's a website that comes out of the UK where you can actually get some pretty good number practice. And at least the anecdotes that they tell off of that website are that it's helped people who really want to become more numerate because they want to become a nurse or they want to do something that requires a lot of numbers. It's helped them to do that. That's the hard one. Some of the easier ones are, there's multiple of them. So one of them is to have them, when they're faced with a particular task, like imagine you're trying to help somebody and they're about to do their taxes maybe, something that's pretty heavily numeric that they might find frightening, is to, believe it or not, have them sit back and say, and just think about what's important in their lives. And it's not going to be those taxes. It's going to be their family and friends. It's going to be religion. It's going to be, it's going to be something that's important to them. And as they reflect on that and they think about kind of its meaning for their own lives, it sort of causes them to abstract away from the fear of the moment, and they're better able to approach it and not be as defensive. It actually does help. We have studies that show it helps. People become more confident with their ability, and they actually do score better on math tests when we have them do that. Another thing is to give them information in better form, give them numbers in better formats. And so oftentimes companies give us, well, not just companies, doctors, all kinds of people give us numbers and formats that are just not transparent. They're hard to understand. Even something as simple as if you're going to start a new drug and you're going to be on it for 10 years, and they give you the annual chances that some risk is going to occur, well, that doesn't tell you what the risk is over 10 years of time. And that risk over 10 years of time is very different than just that annual risk. And so you can provide information to people in much more transparent formats. And there are kind of a variety of sort of simple things that you can do to help with that. One of them, by the way, is not having distracting information around numeric information. So provide them with less information. So in the United States, about a third of our working age adult population, so it's not even including older adults, but about a third of our working age adult population is essentially functionally enumerate in how our current financial and health environments operate. They can do simple processes with numbers. They can count, they can sort numbers, they can do like simple arithmetic and use simple percentages. But if you put other distractions around them, other numbers that aren't as important, flowery text that, I don't know, says something, it actually reduces their number. It reduces how well they're able to understand the target of what they're supposed to be understanding. So that's something else you can do. Trying to think about what some of the other tricks are. Those are the main ones that are popping to mind right now. Yeah.
Delightful talk, Dr. Peters.
Thank you.
First, I want to share something from my childhood going way back. I've always been attached to word association, and the number 7 has been my favorite because it rhymes with the word heaven, number 1. Number 2, it's the only number from 1 to 10 that has 2 syllables. All the other numbers have 1 syllable, so I figured it must be better than all the other numbers in comparison. That's my childhood free association. Now, my question is, when I try to deal with auto insurance agents, they always have these kind of way that they figure, but to use your word, it's in the shadows. How do I break the code of figuring out how a given auto insurer comes to what my rate should be? Because it's usually hidden. And they just said, well, we have a kind of computer to fix it out, but they don't tell you how. Can you help me crack that code?
So I'm not sure, but let me see if I can repeat. So what you're asking is you have an auto insurance person, and it's unclear to you why you're being charged the rate that you're being charged?
Yeah, the formula is not really disclosed, and I really want to know what's behind it.
So that they're not willing to disclose how they came up with the rate?
Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, honestly, on that one, I would be comparing other auto insurance companies. I don't know what the trick is with auto insurance companies and how they calculate anything. That's one of those things. So for me, once I had stopped and paused and I'd asked them questions and they hadn't answered, now I don't trust the numbers and I don't trust the person. And I look elsewhere at that point because there are some numbers that are going to be opaque, and so you should have comparison, is what I would say. And the comparison, if they're not going to be providing you with information that helps you with that, then I would look for comparison externally and perhaps switch companies. That's the way I would think about that one.
Hi, my name is Franca. So, yeah, this is the last question. So you sparked a curiosity in me when you said numbers and emotion. And what came to mind with me is that I love to travel. I travel a lot. And I go by plane, obviously, all over, the world. And constantly people say, aren't you afraid to fly? And, this emotional thing, and I say, well, aren't you afraid to commute to work? Where your chances of having a fatal situation is enormous compared to mine.
Yeah.
So that's the emotional, and people, you can reason with people, and it still doesn't, they'd rather drive, yeah.
Yeah, there was a study that was done after 9/11. There was a study that was done after 9/11 where they looked at how death rates had changed from flying after 9/11 versus driving after 9/11. And what happened was people started moving away from flying and to driving, and the number of deaths overall in the U.S. went up because driving is much more risky than flying is. But driving feels familiar, and it feels safe, even if it's not. And so when you're flying, of course, it's kind of out of your control. Somebody else is controlling it, not you. And so it feels riskier. But I completely agree with you. I would fly first.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Peters. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.